Hi, I'm Teresa Coates, and today we are talking all about binding for quilts and quilt coats. All right, we are live. Yay. Thanks so much for joining us today. We are talking all about binding today, which I'm pretty excited about. It's been something that I think is kind of I don't know, it's a bigger issue for a lot of quilters, and it kind of comes from a long history of quilting and learning how to do this along the way. And I wanted to kind of share that information with you because it's something that gets asked about a lot. When I do the quilt coat classes, it's probably one of the things that doesn't get finished because people aren't really sure what to do. So we're going to talk about a bunch of things today and help you finish your quilts and your quilt coats. So I wanted to kind of do like a little show about the past. So when you get a quilt coat pattern, do we need to talk about the prices first now?
We should.
Okay,
Yeah.
before I get started, let's talk about the prices. So today we're going to give away two PDF copies of the new Lucid quilt pattern, which will come as a PDF of it, and that's what this quilt is the new pattern, which I really love. I think it's beautiful. And it needs binding. So there you go. So it'll give you a great excuse to be able to do that. So at the end, Hawk will choose two winners and we'll do that. Okay, so in the Lucid pattern and lots of other things, they say bind as desired. So bind as desired doesn't really help if you don't know what you're doing or you don't really know how it can be done. And so hopefully I can answer a lot of your questions. If you have questions along the way, please do put them in the comments. Hawk is here and he will help me get those answered as we go. So I'm excited about getting all the things fulfilled that you need, all the questions answered. So a long time ago, I started quilting. So my first quilt was in 1992, and that was, I didn't know how to bind it. And so it was one that I'd gotten like in a magazine. It was one of those patterns, and it was a cross stitch clown one. So I have it here to show you, and I'll show you how so it's old. And I think this is really funny. I was talking to my friend Rose about this, is that way back then I decided to sign it with my signature and the date. So there you go. But anyway, so this is the quilt. This is the very first quilt that I made. It's just a little bit of patchwork and a lot of cross stitch. Cute little clowns. I really like them. And I didn't know how to bind. So when the pattern told me bind as desired, I had no idea what to do. So I did it envelope style. You can kind of see I just stitched along the edge. So I quilted the back. I quilted the front just a little bit. And then I sewed them together, turned them inside out, and top stitched along the edge. No binding whatsoever, which is a way that you could finish the edges for sure, but it's not the cutest. When I got around, so this was for my son when my son was born. And then when my daughter was born, I made her a quilt. And by that time, I'd been quilting for a few years, but hadn't really made that many quilts, just a little handful of them. And so then I made her baby quilt, which was this cute little 9-patch, which I have to say, I'm pretty proud of my points on this. They match pretty well. But my binding, I still didn't know what to do. And so I did what is now called a self-binding, and it was probably called that then. I just didn't know what it was, and I kind of made it up, where I took the background fabric and I brought it around to the front and stitched it down. You can see my edges aren't super even, but my points are pretty good. And then I just quilted it, just a really simple quilting. So this is a self-binding technique, and we'll talk about this at the end. But I do feel like it's one of those things that seemed like it would be easier when I did it. And now that I know how to do binding, it's actually not as easy as binding. And it's a little bit harder to make it look really nice. So let's talk about how to do just regular binding. There are two ways of cutting your binding, and you can do it with the fabric, or you can do it a bias cut. So let's talk about doing it with the fabric first, and then we'll talk about the bias. So when you're cutting it with the fabric, I just have a little bit of fabric. Oh, let me show you with this one. So if we do it with the fabric, it means just across the, from the fold over to the selvages. So selvage to selvage is the the width of fabric. So I can tell that this is a square that I got out of a 10 pack. This way, it doesn't stretch really at all. That's the lengthwise. Okay, if I stretch it this way, then I got a little bit of stretch. Okay, that's the width of fabric. And if I stretch it this way, I have lots of stretch, and that's the bias. Okay, so those are the different ways that the fabric can stretch. When we do it with the fabric, it gives us a little bit of stretch, which we need really for binding and getting around any sort of corners and stuff like that. Using length of fabric really isn't recommended. So width of fabric is what we want to do. And then do we want to show how to cut it and then do the bias fabric? Probably, right? Let's show how to cut it with the fabric. Okay, so if we're going to cut it with the fabric, we can go ahead and go to the top camera. So what I've got here is a yard and something of fabric. And this is fabric that I have to do a binding with. So I brought it so that I can just use it today. I'll cut a little bit of binding. Okay, so all we're going to do is I have it folded in half. I want to cut off an end, so I'm going to turn this around. Use my ruler. I'm going to keep my edges folded together here. Let's see if this ruler is long enough. In fact, it is. So to get a straight, one of the things, the straight strip, is that we need to do it so that there is a fold on a line here and that a fold is on the line up here. Okay, so that matches. If we don't, we get a little bit of a V is what will happen. So you'll get strips that aren't quite straight. And I'll actually show you that in a second, what not to do. So we need to clean up the edge. And then I'm going to turn this around so I can cut my strip. Okay, so cutting it, I'm just going to cut it with the fabric here. So I will do this in just a second because we do want to talk about the width. How wide do I want to cut this is really the problem. And that's what people want to know is like, how wide do I cut it? And there's a whole bunch of variations. So you'll find different tutorials that talk about cutting it at 2 inches all the way up to 2.5 inches. So I have some samples that I did that show how to, or what they look like when you do them. So I have them labeled here. These are all of them ranging from 2 inches to 2.5 inches. The thing you'll notice here is that they're all basically the same size from here. So even though I cut them at different widths, from the front, they all look the same, right? But if I turn them over, you can see the difference there. Is that still clear? Yeah, okay. Yep. So you can see this one is the 2-inch one. This is, I believe, the 2 1/8. Yep, this is 2 1/8. This is 2 1/2. And this one is 2 1/4. Yep. Yep. So you can see the difference in how wide the backing is, how much it overlaps back here, depending on how big you have cut your binding. All right. So for me, I like cutting it at 2 inches if I'm going to hand sew it. So that's what I'm doing with this one. So this side is, let me take that out so we can see it better. So this one I sewed to this side, brought it around, and I hand stitched it down. We'll talk more about the ladder stitch later.
Can we switch to the detail camera?
Sure. Can you see it better there?
Let's try that.
Let's do that. Okay. Let me see if I can get this to come on and get the light. Okay. So let me go back, make sure I'm at where I'm at. Okay, so this is the 2-inch one. So this one is what I use when I'm doing hand sewing, because then I can get basically a 1/4 inch on either side. Okay, it's a really nice little finish. This one is a 2 1/8 inch binding. Okay, this is what I use when I machine sew them down. We sew it to this side and top stitch it here. Okay, and I feel like that one I get a nice tight border that actually stays pretty consistent with that 1/4 inch. It's probably more like of a 1/3 of an inch. But I think it looks really nice. Okay, this side you can see that I've stitched it along here, but because I'm stitching it from the front, sometimes I wander up onto the binding. So choosing your thread color when you're thinking about this is important as well. Okay, this one is 2 1/2, which I know a lot of people use. This one is used a lot of times when we do it, that we sew it to the front and bring it around to the back, and we sew it from the front along the edge here. So we do a little stitch in the ditch and catch that. And if we have a bigger backing, we can make sure and catch it all. Okay. Take off the little sticker that's kind of ugly there. Okay, so that one is the 2.5. This one is the 2.25. And this one I sewed on this side, brought it around, and top stitched from this side. Okay, so this is the 2.25. All right, this one is probably my favorite one to teach people, and it's the size that I use in like the coat pattern. When I tell people what size of a binding to cut, I tell them 2.25 because it feels like it's pretty easy to do from the front, and if you wanted to sew it from the back, you absolutely, like hand sew it, you absolutely could, and it wouldn't be too big. So deciding on which size you want to cut your binding is really the first step. All right, so I'm going to cut them today at 2.25 because that's generally what I recommend. So I'm going to go over here and we're going to show you how to cut it, whether we're doing a width of fabric or a bias cut. Okay, so can we switch the camera over? Okay, so if we're doing it with the fabric, we're going to need yardage to do this. Really, either way, we need yardage to start with. I always recommend starting with a yard because then you just have plenty. And I have a box that I keep all of my extra bindings in. So I make all the cuts and then I cut too much and then I just roll them up and stick them in the box. There's another little tool that I use sometimes, which is called this little binding baby. And it's super cute. I love her. She's from Doohickey Designs, and she makes all different kinds of girls in these, and some of them are taller, some of them are shorter, I think, than this one. It's just super cute, and you can wrap your binding around it. It also fits up on your machine so that you can actually bring it out and stick it, sew your binding on while it's still attached to this, and it will just spin around and keep your binding off. So that's another great way of storing your binding when you've cut too much, which, like I said, I generally do. Okay, so overhead camera, let's talk about cutting it on the mat. So we're going to do 2.25. So what I first need to do is make sure that I'm looking at my ruler right. This is one that has the extra 1/2 inch over here. So I want to make sure that I don't cut this wrong. So I'm going to line up. So one of the ways we can do this, we're going to do it with both of them. Let's see, you guys should be able to see that pretty well, that it's even from this line to this line. Okay, I'm going to lay my ruler on here. And I'm going to line up this line here at the 2.25. And just cut through it. Okay, I wobbled slightly because I'm cutting a lot of layers. Okay, so now we have our 2.25 inch binding with the fabric. If I have to do it again, I probably do 2 layers instead of 4. Okay, but you see it has a little bit of stretch, a little bit of give, but not a ton. Okay, this works for almost any sort of project, but sometimes you might want to do a bias binding. And I want to show you how to, oh, yes, I'll show you how to do that. And then I want to come back to the Stripology ruler. Okay, so sometimes you might want to do a bias, and let me show you one reason why. Oh, here it is. Okay, so this is a little sample that I did, rounded versus, or rather a bias binding and a not bias binding. And I don't know, let's bring it over to the other camera so you can see a little better. Okay, move my little tools out of the way there. So this side, I did it with the bias binding, and you can see it curves really nicely, fits right around this edge beautifully. And then this side, you can see that it pulls and kind of comes up here. You see that little edge that pops up? So it pulls up quite a bit there. Okay, and that's because this was done with the fabric, so it doesn't stretch as well. The other thing that happens, I missed a little bit, which can totally happen because it doesn't stretch and doesn't move the way that you want it to. The other reason you might want to use a bias binding is because it actually wears a lot better. So when we have an edge like this, when we've cut it basically straight of grain, you're going to end up having a couple of threads that run along this edge that go all the way across. Well, if you get a little tear in one spot, it's kind of weakened the entire thing because that thread will start to break. And that's often where we end up with frays along the edge of a quilt, you'll see like the bias or the binding is just trashed. And that's because it's done with the fabric. When you do it with the bias, you end up with your threads going this way and this way. So you have a lot more thread up here that's going to get the wear and tear. Does that make sense?
Oh yeah, so on the bias, you end up with a bunch of short threads on the diagonal.
Mhm.
So if one of those breaks, it doesn't run the whole.
It doesn't
run the whole
Right.
binding.
It doesn't weaken the whole thing.
Got
So for me, I like using bias binding just because I know it's going to wear better. It's going to fit around anything that I put it on. And I know it'll last a long time and not give me any hassle. So there's two reasons why you might choose the bias binding. Okay, so let me show you how I do that one. So when I'm cutting the bias binding, it's really important to, let's move the camera. So when you're doing the bias binding, it's really important to actually get it like basically on the bias. So the way that I usually do that is that I will start and I will cut off the selvage and then I tear it and then I will fold it up. So this is, put this aside. So what I usually do is I start with a piece that's about 18 inches or so. I often will do it, if I'm doing for a coat, I will do the whole yard so that I can get a longer bit. But for a lot of things, you can use a smaller piece. The thing we need to do is we need to make sure that we cut across the bias of the fabric because you can see how much stretch is there versus the stretch here or the stretch here, okay? So I'm going to turn this because I can tell this is with the fabric here. A little bit of stretch, no stretch, lots of stretch, okay? So I want my binding to go this way so I can get around the curves. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this. So this is one way of doing it, okay? Do it this way. I'm going to fold it this way. And I'm going to do basically the same thing I did before and cut off the edge and then start cutting my strips. So this one, I only have to make sure that this bottom edge is lined up with something so that I can cut it straight. Let me get that. We're just going to cut off just the edge. And that's really because folding it a couple of times makes it so that this might be slightly uneven, and I can see that those aren't the same widths here, but now we've got a nice straight edge here. So then I can turn this around and cut my 2 1/4. Okay, and then I can just keep cutting along that edge and I'll have these pieces. And you can see these have a little bit more stretch to them. Okay, so this will curve around a corner really nicely. And then, like I said, it actually wears better. One of the other perks about these is you do get a 45 already here, which is kind of nice. We'll talk about why that works well in just a bit. But first, I want to show you the other thing that we discovered yesterday. And I was trying to use, I wanted to use the stripology ruler so that I could cut some binding. Okay. So I'm going to show this by taking these apart. And I'm going to mark one. So what we did, let's see if this pen will work. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mark here at my 2 1/4. So I'm lining up that line that I just drew right along the 2 1/4 line. Okay. Oops. I'm gonna line it up again. See if I can get those lines to show up a little better. All right, there we go. I'm going to go back over in this one so we can see it because we need to see it underneath. Can you see that okay? See what I'm doing? Great. Okay. So now I've drawn these out. So usually you would have cut these as we went, right? Then we use the stripology ruler. So I want to try this, and we're going to do the same thing like we did last night. Would you mind handing me that ruler, Hawk? Okay, so here is my Stripology ruler, and this is the Stripology squared. Yeah, Stripology squared ruler. All right, so this is kind of their one that fits a lot of things. All right, which is great. So now what I want to do is I'm going to put this as if I have cut off my edge. So here's my 1 inch. So I would clean up my edge. All right, and then I would move this. So this is a 1/4 inch line that's on the outside. So I marked it with this green sticker. I'm going to move it over, and then I would cut it here, and I could see that it goes right on there. And then I would cut it on this line, and I could see that my line is here, but the line that I drew is here. Can you see how far off that is? Does that make sense?
Not real well, but almost 1/8 of an inch.
It's almost
right?
1/8 of an inch, because here is the line, and here's my cutting line. So it actually got more and more inaccurate. So if I were to continue doing this, by the time I got all the way across, my strips would not actually be 2 1/4 inches anymore. So that's the issue there. So I'm going to cut this at the right thing. So first I'm going to put this here. I'm going to pretend like I'm trimming off my edge, because I already trimmed it. No, see, now I messed it up. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to cut at 4 1/2. And then I would cut at 9. And then I'm going to move this over 1/4 of an inch. And then I'm going to cut again. And this is on 2, because I have that 1/4 inch here. So I've added. Okay. And then at 6 1/2.
Got it. So the way the Stripology ruler works, there's a slot for your rotary cutter every 1/2 inch.
Yes, on this one.
Because we're using an increment of 1/4 inch, 2 1/4 is the width we want. You're adjusting for that a 1/4 inch using that extra.
Correct.
That
so I
extra
have to,
spot
so
on the side.
right. So I have to cut 4 1/2 inches at a time, and then I can slide it over a 1/4 of an inch, and then cut those in half, basically is what I'm doing. And then I create these 2 1/4 inch strips. All right.
And what we're getting is a lot more accuracy.
It's a lot more accurate. So let me show you, because here, actually, if you can move this back over there. Okay, so now let's go back over to the close-up here, and then you can see how far this got off. Okay, so on the first one, it's just the tiniest bit. Here's my little black line. Okay, so you can see it's just a little bit off the edge. Can you see that? Okay, little black line. Okay, the next row, a little bit more. I say that one's almost 1/8 of an inch. And then by this third one, I'm off a little bit more. So it's gotten more and more off as I go. And let me tell you why that happens. And it's because we are dealing with the width of this little line and where you have placed it on the fabric to get the right measurement. Okay, so this little line has its own width. So whether you've put it on this side of the pencil line or this side of the pencil line, it's going to change how wide your strips actually are. So cutting it with the Stripology ruler made it much, much more accurate.
When you're cutting wood, the width of the blade is called the kerf.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to account for removing that amount of wood, which is the thickness of the saw blade. So it's basically the same problem.
Right. Right.
Got it.
So cutting it, when I did just one strip, I was able to get it the same size. When I measured it out numerous times and would have cut, it starts to change. And then your cuts get more accurate. So if you have a Stripology ruler, that's a really easy way to do it. And again, I'll say that you cut at the 0, the 2 inches, no, 0, 4 1/2 inches, and 9 inches. Then you're going to move it to the 1/4 inch mark and cut it at 2 inches and 6 1/2 inches. Okay. So I will do a blog post about this episode, and I'll get those notes in there. But I really wanted to show it does make a big difference. That's okay. It does make a big difference on how you cut it. And the Stripology rulers do make a big, big difference on just getting it very, very accurate. So all of these are going to be exactly the same size. Okay. So it's perfect. All right, that's what we want. Some perfect little binding. All right. Okay, so that's how we do it with the stripology ruler. One of the other things that I have gotten asked about is how to do continuous binding. And this is one of those ideas that people have that, yeah, they think it'll work super duper well. It's kind of sold as being this great idea. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And I'm going to tell you why it's not my favorite idea. Okay, so basically what you do is you take a square of fabric and you're going to cut it in half diagonally. All right, so we want to create it. So it's going to be on the bias. I have a tiny piece here that we're going to deal with today. It's just a little 10-inch square. Normally you would do this with like an 18-inch piece of fabric. This is the way that they're also done in like the By Annie patterns. They're all this way, and she tells you what size square to cut. You can find them in those patterns, and you can also find like cheat sheets that'll tell you how big to cut your square for different measurements of fabric. Let me show you how to do it. Okay, yep. All right, so I am going to cut it on the bias by folding it in half again. And I'm just going to put this right along the edge, line it up with my fold. Okay, and cut this in half. So again, this is just a square. I'm going to cut it into 2 triangles. Okay, so let me put it back square for you. So that's where it was. I cut it in half. Now I'm going to take this side and I'm going to move it right over here. Okay, so these sides are going to get sewn together with a 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. All right, so I'm going to do that and then we'll come back. All right. So I have my 1/4 inch foot on there. There are a variety of different kinds of 1/4 inch feet. And this is just one of the standard ones that came with my machine. And it's actually, oh, it might be one that actually that I bought extra. I think I did, because this is the one that I think I tore the guide off because I don't like the guides. So actually, now that I think about it, I think that's what that is. So let's go ahead and sew this. I'm going to stick my needle down, or my foot down. I am sewing with red thread, you'll see, and that's really so you can see what I'm doing. Obviously, normally you would use a matching thread, but we're just going to use one that you can see really well, and hopefully that'll help. So we're just going to sew this right along here. I chose a funky one in it being a stripe, so we'll see how this works out. See how I cut it, if I cut it right. All right. So I've got that sewn all along here. Now we need to iron it. So I'm going to come back over here and give it a little press. All right, so once I've gotten here, here's my piece sewn together, and I'm just going to press this open. I'm going to press it first flat, get all the seams set, kind of get those stitches to sink in a little bit, and then I will press this open. So kind of finger press it first, and I can slide the iron along here. Okay. So there we go. There's my piece. Iron it from the front. All right. And I'm going to give this back to you, Hawk. Okay. All right. So now we've got our diagonal. So my bias is this direction, right? So I'm going to draw lines on the back of it here. And I'm going to draw lines across here, how we would cut the binding. We're not going to cut it. We're just going to draw it right now. Oh, I need my bigger ruler. All right, so I'm going to find 2 1/4. And we're going to draw this line. Okay, good. I can see that. You guys can see that too then. All right, and we're going to do our next one. So normally you would get a lot more strips than this because you would have a bigger piece of fabric, but I just want to show you how it works. And if you're doing a small project, this might work. And actually, I'm just going to trim that off. So I don't need that. That is my excess. Okay, so now I've got these together. So now I want to be able to sew it so it'll become one long strip. So the trick is that we're going to sew this edge to this edge and this edge to this edge. All right. So this is where it gets a little funky, because what I have to do is come over here and line this up so that these cross each other at 1/4 of an inch. So I have a really hard time telling where that's going to be. So a lot of times I just do this. So here's my, where they cross, okay? So I'm gonna fold this right sides together, bring these together, and I need that first one to be by itself. And then this is gonna come here. So now I know where this is gonna be. Okay, here's a pin. So I need this, I know it needs to cross through there. And then it needs to hit that line. So once I've stuck it through there, I can kind of move this over, stick it through the line, and get that, futz it so it matches, okay? So now that matches. Hold it tight, repin it, and do the same thing here, and make sure that where this comes together, where that little intersection is at 1/4 of an inch, I can bring it over here and it will match the seam there at 1/4 of an inch, okay? So then I'll pin it there. Now I need to sew along this edge. I'm going to pin that top one too, because it wants to do some funky things on me. Okay. So this intersection should be 1/4 of an inch away from that edge as well. And we'll see when we cut it out how well I did without marking it. So let's sew this. And again, we're going to do this with 1/4 of an inch seam allowance. And I just need it, it's a little funky. So you can see it doesn't want to lay flat, and it's because we've twisted it and it's on the bias. So we're just going to have to carefully put it in here and worry with one little bit at a time to make sure that it stays flat. All right. I'm going to stitch here, do a little back stitch. Okay, and we're sew right along this edge. Now as it gets here, I need to lay this out and make sure that that's not getting any little puckers in it. And try to keep that matching. It's totally not going to match. I'm going to have to let it go. Do a little back stitch. And cut my thread. Okay, so even though I pinned it, it kind of grew on me. It happens sometimes. So now we're going to cut it. So basically what we've created with drawing those lines is our cutting lines. We're going to go ahead and do, just use my scissors for that. So let me get my rulers out of the way so it's a little easier to see. All right, so I can't use my rotary cutter because if I cut through here, I'm cutting through both sides. You can use a little one to stick in here, but you end up having to switch it around a lot, which is not as much fun. So I'm going to use my scissors here, and we're just going to cut along this line. And one of the things that I don't love about this technique is that I have to cut it with scissors, and I'm not quite as accurate with the scissors as I am with my rotary cutter. But I'm going to do my best to cut along the line. Aim from one side to the other. So I'm just kind of cutting this whole little loop out. So you can imagine this will take a lot longer if you've done a big, 18-inch piece, but not terrible. Okay, so now I've got it, and it's one big piece of binding that's all together, okay? The selling point of this that people like is that it's already sewn together. Like now it's one big strip. The thing that I don't like about it is this, and that it has just a million seam allowances as we go. And that's just going to kind of repeat. So you never get very long stretches that don't have a seam allowance in them.
And using this striped fabric is basically like the worst case scenario.
Oh, totally.
Right? Like normally you would recommend like a tossed print
Totally.
or something like this.
You can absolutely do it like this. This would be obviously not a great way of doing it because I can't match here, but like this match isn't terrible.
Got it.
You know, some of them came close.
So
they're between.
This seems clever, but not necessarily that useful.
Exactly. So this is one that I did that was tossed, and what it looks like once I've flattened out all the seams. Okay. So it's just a lot of seams. And for me, this adds bulk as we're sewing. Every time that there's a seam allowance, there's extra bulk. There's more layers of fabric. And in this one here, there's ends up being, what is that? 6 layers of fabric or something that come together with all of these seam allowances and everything right here. It's a bunch. So it's very thick and not as easy to sew over, especially when I'm going to fold it in half and then fold it again. I end up getting a lot of layers there. So this isn't my favorite technique, but this is how it works. And lots of people like it. So if you are interested, you can give it a shot and see if you like it too. I'm just going to show you all the things in case maybe you like it. All right. So
I'm throwing up a little note from Ruth.
Okay. So that is how that one works. Let me show you how we would do it if we were to sew our strips together that we have cut either widthwise or like we did with the Stripology ruler. We have these strips. Okay. So this is my Stripology. Actually, I'll just use this one because it's the one we cut. So this was the width of fabric. This was the bias. All right. We're going to sew them together the same way, and we're going to sew them so that they continue to have a bias seam here. And the reason we want to sew it at the 45 is so that we don't end up with a thick seam here. Because again, if we sewed this straight, we're going to have a seam allowance here. And then when we fold it, it's a lot of seam allowance. Okay. We don't want that much seam allowance because it just gets thick and hard to sew.
So if the seam allowance is on the 45 or on the bias, then they kind of get out of each other's way.
Exactly. When they fold over, they don't sit on top of each other.
Got it.
Exactly. So here is I just cut this in half so we could have 2 pieces of binding. All right. So I've got my 2 pieces. I'm going to turn this one right side up. And I'm going to put the second one on top of it at a 45. So an easy way of doing this is just doing it on your ruler so you can see. I know that if I put it here, I'm going to kind of catch this, the selvage. So I'm going to move it over here and I'm going to put it right along here so I can tell. Yep, that'll be fine. Okay, so I can tell that this is going to be on the 45. And then I'm going to go ahead and just mark it. Oopsie. There, I just totally ruined it. So this is when my little magnets are going to come in handy. Stay there. Okay. So now I need to sew it from here to here. One of the things that people get confused about is which direction to sew it. So if you get confused, know that it's a 7 that you're going to make. So I always lay it down in a 7 shape. All right. And we're going to sew it this direction so that when we twist it, it comes off this way and creates a straight line. All right. If you sew it the other direction, you end up flipping it up this way and you create another L. So we don't want that. So always from the top left to the bottom right. So think of it as how if you were reading, you would start up here and read and end down here. Okay. So we're going to start up here, get down here. I'm going to draw it so you can see how that works. This is a great way to kind of learn how to eyeball it, because after a while you'll get pretty good at it. And what we want to do is it should be going basically from valley to valley. So on either side of these, we have where the 2 come together. I call those a valley. All right, so that's going to go from this valley to this valley. You see that all right?
Yep.
Okay, so now I'm going to pin it. And I really do like my pins because they keep things where I need them to be. So now I'm going to go ahead and sew this. All right, so I'm going to lay these together. I've got my little line here. Put my needle down. I am going to do a little back stitch. I will say in my other machine, this tends to make it eat it. So if it does, I'm going to have to get a leader ender. Oh, it worked. Okay, great. All right, so now I'm just going to sew along this line. Super duper easy, and I don't really have to pay much attention except to sew along that line. Again, I'm going to back stitch just because I don't want them coming apart as I work with them, especially if I am cutting my binding like a long time before I'm going to use it, because sometimes that happens. I don't want it to come apart. So if I don't do the back stitching, these are likely to come apart. So then we're going to fold it slightly off on either side, and it won't matter because the part we care about here is in the middle. Okay, so let me go ahead and okay. Now I'm going to trim this. All right, and there we've got our binding. So then I would just trim or press these flat and just keep going. All right, let me show you on the bias binding. Same way. Okay, but I've got like automatic 45s here from where I cut it before. I'm going to pin this here and here, and this time I'm just going to use my laser to show you how to do this. So again, I'm going to sew from the valley to the valley, but I can just use my laser to kind of figure out where I'm going to be. All right, so I can turn that. There we go. Get that flat. Turn my laser on. You can see the laser?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. So then what I do is I put my needle down and I get my fabric lined up right up to the needle. And then I put my needle up and start sewing. And my fabric moved just slightly. So now I want to aim for that one. So just kind of keep that valley in sight. Clip my thread. And then we'll have the binding. Okay, so again, I'm just going to use my scissors here. I'll trim this off. So I tend to trim off my little dog ears as I'm going. If you don't, you'll end up with the dog ears hanging off. So when you turn this, you'll have like little triangles here and there, and those are totally fine. You can clip them now or later, or not at all. They'll hide in your binding. Okay, so there we go. That's how we get our bindings together. So you'll do that as many times as needed to create the big strip of binding that you need. All right. Okay. Yay. Yay, it worked. Okay, so now once we've gotten our binding together, or like the binding strips together, I go ahead and I fold those in half, and then we're just going to sew them on. There's a couple of ways that you can do that too. So most people just sew it on with a 1/4 inch foot or with a 1/4 inch seam using whatever foot they want to. One of the ways that I love doing it is with my serger. And my serger, I can actually, I set it, which is, oh gosh, now I can't remember what the setting is on my, would you go look at the top dial on the serger? I think it's 3.5, but I don't want to say that unless it actually is, because it should say like 6 and 3 or something. We'll get it found out. Okay, because at that setting, that's the width of it, and that will be exactly how big. And I think it's 3.5. The little roundy dial on the right. Okay, I'll have to find it. But I think it's 3.5, because 3.5 is where your machine is when you have a center stitch and it goes to the edge.
You actually have this set to a 5.
On the top one?
On the top left? Yeah.
I think it's a different number. We'll figure it out.
Okay.
I'll post it in the blog. But really what you're doing is you're getting this sort of a seam. So you end up serging it and it becomes very nice. And it's a nice 1/4 inch seam. So what I like about this is that when I sew the 1/4 inch, it's really easy for me to kind of wiggle a little bit and not get just a straight 1/4 inch. Like it's not perfect every time. When I do it with the serger, it's perfect every time. And I found it's really, really helpful. And especially when you're working with a large quilt, because they get kind of heavy. And I feel like my stitches get a little less accurate when I'm dealing with the weight. And so serging actually makes it super duper easy. So if you have a serger, this is a great time to break it out and just use it to serge your binding on. So what I do is I fold my binding in half, I pin it down or clip it down, and then I just run it through the serger. Super duper easy. I do talk about it in a little video that we have on YouTube really quickly, and I do a little demo of it there. So super easy to do if you have a serger. It's a great way of doing it. Once we've gotten it on here, and really before we get it on, we have to decide which side we're going to put it on. So if you're going to sew it to the front, then you'll bring it around to the back, and you can either stitch from the front with a stitch in the ditch, or you can stitch from the back. But most of the time, and that would be a hand stitching most of the time. Otherwise, you can sew it to the back, bring it around to the front, and do the stitching there. That's my preference, because if I do it that way, I have a lot more freedom in how I want to finish that seam, or that, yeah, I guess that seam. Okay, so is that where we're at, right? Types of stitches? Yes. Okay, so let me show you some of the things. And I guess, oh, no, actually, we missed one thing. Before we get to stitching it down, because we talked about sewing it on, once you've sewn it on, you're going to leave a gap, and we're going to put it together. We have to join the ends. I think it was Lynn asked me to do this and make sure I showed how to join the ends. Okay. So again, I'm going to show you one of the ways that gets like shown on quick little reels that seems like a winner. And I'll show you why it's not my favorite. And then I'll show you the right way of doing it. Okay. So let's go over here, because this is one that I have seen a bunch, that people will say that you're just going to sew up to each other and then you flip them and sew them. All right. So this is the demo that you see, I have seen lots of times on Instagram and Facebook Reels. All right. So let me get my sewing going here. I'm going to turn my laser off. And what I want to do is I want to stop here where it comes right to, but not past where I started. Okay. So this is a tiny gap, and it's really because you would sew it all the way. I just want to show you this last little bit. But normally I don't sew my bindings this close to each other at the end. All right. So I'm going to sew it. Do one more stitch. Okay. I'm going to do a little back stitch. Okay, so in that little video, if you've seen it, they flip it over this way, which gets harder with quilt fabric. Okay, and then this gets flipped over this way. Okay, so these end up at a 90-degree angle again. Okay, does that sort of make sense? You want me to do it again?
Yeah, can you do that again, please?
Okay, so I've sewn the ends together. I flip this side over, I flip the seam allowance under. Okay, now I take this bottom one to get these to sew at a bias. I have to get it to go 90 degrees. So I'm going to turn this. And now I want to sew from this corner down to there.
So back into the valleys again.
Yep.
From valley to valley.
Yep, exactly. So I'm going to start in there. And then I'm going to sew right up to that stitching, but not past it. We're going to see how well this works. I did it once before. So now we've got our binding sewn together. Okay, so that works pretty well in that you have it sewn together and it's pretty flat here. Let's go ahead and trim off my seam allowances. All right, so it's a little bit less bulk. One, you can see the red stitches through there more than you would if I were using the right color thread. But this idea works. But then I've got these little dog ears that I'm going to have to cut off. Go ahead and do that. And then I bring this over to the other side. What I don't like about this is that it gets real thick in here. Okay, and that if you don't get that perfectly even, these edges aren't going to match. All right. So it's kind of a quick and dirty way of doing it, but it takes, you know.
Yeah, I'm going to say you made that look good, but it also seemed really complicated.
It's a little complicated. And if you're dealing with a really thick quilt or a big quilt, this could get really, like, you have to sew the whole, or fold the whole quilt over like this. It just is a little bit extra. If you don't get these to match valley to valley, this is where you get the little, a little step right there. All right. Let me show you. So we're going to sew this, and I'm purposely going to miss it because it happens a lot that we don't actually purposely do it, but it just happens. I say that and I nailed it there for a second. Okay. Okay, and I'm going to sew to the other valley over there. And I totally did this wrong. That's hilarious. I knew I laid it on there wrong. I was like, I laid it on there wrong. I did. Okay. You didn't catch me, Hawk. You didn't.
No, because you were trying to do it wrong.
And I did. So let me try it again. Okay. So it would have folded out this way, and this would have folded out this way, and then it would fold here. Okay. Yes. This is the way I want to do it.
It's so hard doing it wrong when you know how to do it right.
I know. But I did it all wrong, so that was good. If you're going to do it wrong, do it real wrong. And see, and I still did it pretty right. But you can see there's a little bit of a blip right there.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's what will happen. And you can see that this is another one that I wouldn't choose to do as binding, because you end up with these, especially as a continuous binding, because you'll have a bunch of these seams that don't actually match up. If I were doing this in long stretches and I only have, 3 or 4 intersections on my whole quilt like this that don't match, I'm not going to care. If I have them every 12 inches or so, I'm going to get grumpy about it. Okay.
Got it.
Choices of fabric. Okay. So once you've done this, so let's move the camera. So you could do it that way. That's really what I mean. You could do it that way. Okay, which does seem kind of quick and dirty, but doesn't lay super flat. Yeah, just doesn't lay super flat. The traditional way of doing it, and this is the way I actually finish my quilts, and I just have a quilt hunk here, cut out of an actual quilt. And what I've done is I've sewn on the binding as if we had sewn around a whole quilt and we've gotten to the end.
That's a quilt coat scrap, right?
Yes. It's a quilt
Where did that come from?
Yeah. Why did she cut up a quilt? Because it was cut up for a quilt or quilt coat. So what I usually do is I leave a hand's width is basically how I measure this. Okay. My hand width is about 8 inches. So that's what I do is I just measure a hand width, and that's what the separation. So when I start sewing, I will leave a mark as to where I want to stop, and then I come back around. So once I have it sewn on and I have these overlaps, what I want to do is figure out how to get these to match so that they can also have a bias seam right here. All right. You could sew these together just end to end, and then you have that bulky seam in the middle. And we don't want that. So the trick is, how do we do this and actually get them to match up nicely? So we're going to give it a try. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to cut off just a little hunk of this because I'm going to use it as a measuring device. All right, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pin this just at the end here. Okay, and the reason I want to do that is because as I'm futzing with this, this will want to move, and I don't want it to move. And also it's easier to see the end of it if I have a pin in there. Okay, so then I'm going to take this, I'm going to put this over here, and I also pin that in place sometimes. Okay, I like to kind of give it a little bit of a stretch so that when I sew this on, I might have just a little bit short of binding here, but it can stretch into place rather than having too much binding and then it puckers. Okay, so that's the reason for just the tiniest little bit of stretch. Now here's my pin that marked basically the end of that one. I'm going to put my piece of fabric on there, and I know that that's where I need to cut it. So they should overlap the width of the binding. That should be the overlap. Does that make sense? Do you want me to explain it again?
You're going to have to just show me, because
Okay.
I would have thought it was half of that amount.
Okay, so let me show you again. So
I got
so
you.
we're going to do it through. So I've marked the end of it. Okay. I'm going to fold this over, give it a little tiniest little stretch. Okay. Just really kind of pulling it so it's flat. I'm going to go ahead and that, and then I'm going to clip just the edge of this and unpin it and clip the rest. And that's really just so that I don't accidentally clip through the other side, because I might have done that once or twice. Okay, so now I have my two tail pieces and they need to join. This is the part, I'll be honest with you, that I always have to try it out and then make sure that it works right, because there's always a little extra twist. So when I want to do it, I want to open these up. This is the way I want to do it. And this is probably where you've had your troubles too, is that if I were to sew it across here from valley to valley, I end up with a twist. Okay, so I know that this has to actually turn completely around, which always just seems so wrong.
Oh, you kind of have to preset the twist so that it can untwist to the correct
Yes.
orientation. Got it.
So let's see if I did it
Pre-twist.
right. That will work. Okay, so I always do this where I pin it, because inevitably I will give it a twist the wrong direction. So I know it still needs to be a 7, the way that it's supposed, like on the others when I join the binding. I know it's supposed to be that way, so I can pin it here and try it, but figuring out which way it goes is hard. Okay, so let me do it again, and we'll see if we can do it right the first time. So I'm going to put this one, just open that one out. Then this one, did I twist it this way? I think so. Twist it back toward me. Yep. Okay, so I twisted it toward me a full rotation. Okay, so I opened it, went this direction. And then it will fold. Okay, so let's do that for reals, and then I'll sew it. Okay, so I put these here, and I want them to basically match up. I am not super careful in that I cut them exactly straight, but you can definitely be more careful than me. And I'm just going to pin on either side of this.
Now I understand why you use the little sliver as a measuring tape.
Yeah.
Because you're making a square that's the width of the whole binding fabric.
Right, exactly.
Got it. Okay.
So one of the other things that I have noticed doing this is that I need to sew from this corner to this corner. There's no valleys anymore because we can't do an overlap, right? Because that would shrink it more, and I don't want to do the calculations on how to do that. So they just need to match edge to edge. So what I do is I generally will stick a pin right here where they come together. That this is where I'm aiming for, is that corner. All right, let me show you over here. And we need to fold the quilt out of the way. All right, so I've got my binding here. I've got my pins on either side that I need to sew, and this is the corner I'm going to aim for. So I'm going to turn my laser, whoops, wrong button. I'm going to turn my laser back on, and I need to start right up there at the very end of it. So I'm going to put my needle down so I can kind of see where that's at. And then I will put my foot down and give it a little sew here. Okay. Let's see if I got that right. Looks like it. Great. All right, so now I'm going to trim that seam allowance off. Make sure I'm not catching anything extra. And I can go ahead and just kind of finger press this down. I like to press all the seams open so there is, less layers. Now, as we were talking about earlier, you can see that when I fold these, those seam allowances are in a completely different area. If you are anything like me, these seams will end up on your corners numerous times. So try to be careful about that. But I am super good at nailing them on the corners.
How do you be careful about that, Teresa?
Well, I guess you would have to measure it first. I don't. I just lay them down and then I get a corner. I did it like 3 times on these samples. Okay, so once we've gotten that, we know that's going to work okay. And I'm going to pin it. You could also clip it there. Just going to stick a couple pins so that I know that it will stay there, and then we're going to sew it all the way across. Right? So I'm going to overlap where I started stitching. Go all the way across. Now, if you have made your binding, you've tried to connect it here, and the binding is still just a tiny bit loose, one thing that I recommend is flipping it over, because then as you sew it, the feed dogs will actually bring in the extra a little bit better than if the extra runs along here, because more likely your foot will shove it forward and you'll end up with a little pleat right at the end here. So flip it over if it's there's a little extra binding. All right, so you would sew it this direction instead, right? Make sense?
Oh,
we're good?
I think I understand that. Sure.
Okay.
So
then we're going to fold it over and decide how we're actually going to sew this down. That'll be the next step. What was the question?
No, it's okay. So we haven't really gotten into this. Maybe I'm jumping ahead just a little bit, but when we get to top stitching, obviously there's hand stitching and there's machine stitching.
Yes.
But pretty much all binding at this point, to attach it, you want to use your machine.
Yes.
Even if this is going to be a show quilt.
Yes.
Which I just learned that if you're making a quilt that's going to be in a quilt show and it's going to be judged, that it has to be hand bound.
Yeah.
But this part can still be machine bound, even under those circumstances.
Yes.
Okay,
totally.
got it.
Totally.
So the attachment can still be done by machine.
Yep. So once we've gotten our binding sewn on, then we need to attach it. All right. So I'm going to first give it a little press. So we're going to give that a try. So let's come on over here. And the reason I do this is because we've gotten it here, and if I fold it over, there is a really good chance I'm not going to be able to fold it over as tight because this doesn't want to go that way. So I really just give it a good press to make it stay exactly where I want it to and give it kind of the most length that I can. Okay, then I can fold this over and then I'll stitch it down. So at this point, I have a little bit more leeway in this. One of the things that I really like about doing the serging to stitch this on, so instead of sewing it on with the machine, I would have done this with the serger. I would have finished this part by machine because it's just easier. I could take it back to the machine and finish it up, but I would probably do that first stitch to baste it on with the machine. But the cool thing is that it flattens this edge. Okay, so when I pull the binding around, this edge is really flat on the serged edge, and it's still kind of fat here. Okay, so do you see the difference, what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, the serger smashes the binding,
it
or
does.
the batting down.
Exactly.
In between.
So if you don't have a serger, what can you do? Use a zigzag. So were you going to answer me, Hawk? Did you know the answer to that one?
I was going to answer. I knew that answer.
All right. Well, let's go give it a try. Okay. So I'm just going to use a big zigzag. This one is set at 4 by 4. So we're going to see. Oh, I can't do it with this foot. Whew, that was close.
Well, you almost got to see her break a needle.
Yeah, that would have been exciting. Okay. I'm just going to go ahead and switch because we're going to end up switching feet all the time here. That's kind of what I do. Come on, little guy. There we go. So this is definitely a place where I switch needles about 100 times making samples. Switching feet.
Got it.
Not needles.
So I'm familiar with this thing that you just attached to your machine, but let's start with, what machine are you using?
So it is a Baby Lock Chorus is what I'm using, and this is the dual feed that they have, and it's got like a little belt that runs here that pulls the fabric through. All right, and it works pretty darn well. I am going to use a few different feet today. So this is This is just the standard foot it comes with. This is the 1/4 inch foot that comes with the dual feed. And then this is a, oh, let me show you the other 1/4 inch foot too. So this is the standard one. That was what I was using earlier. All right, so that's also a 1/4 inch foot. Doesn't work for the dual feed. And this one is a stitch in the ditch foot, which also sometimes you'll see it called an edge stitch foot. And it is used for being able to run the seam right down the middle. I'll show you that. But right now I'm just going to use the regular one to do this zigzag. So I'll move these to the side. And then this guy just gets kind of plopped on. All right. So now I just need to make sure that my binding is tucked away because I want to do a zigzag, but not actually hit the binding at all. Okay. So we're going to give this a try and see how this works. Okay. So this is a 4x4 zigzag. So 4 millimeters long, 4 millimeters wide. All right. And I just kind of want to show you the difference of being able to pull this over and how much flatter this gets here versus here. Okay, so if you're struggling with pulling your binding all the way over when you're doing your stitching, I found that doing this makes it much, much easier. So finishing your edges with a zigzag or with the serging helps a ton because you can see a big, big difference in being able to fold this over. So if I fold this over, I can get it over there pretty easily. Here, I have to kind of fight it more because I'm pushing this down and trying. Oops, can you see it? Trying to fight this down and bring it over. Okay, so it gets a little bit harder. So I really recommend doing something like this where we can stitch it down. All right.
Ruth also makes a good note that the other great thing about serging it, or in this case zigzagging it even, is that if you're not going to bind your quilt right away,
yes,
it stabilizes your edge.
That is actually, that's a really, really good point. Yes, that this will stabilize it so that if you are not going to actually bind it soon, this will keep your edge together and it will keep any seams that you have. So if you have a seam allowance that comes out here, and we've trimmed up our quilt at this point, so you've cut off any back stitching that you might have done, and then your seams will start to come apart. So actually doing this will keep them together. Good point, because not everybody binds them right away. That is true. I have a quilt coat that I still haven't finished the binding on, so I feel you. All right, so let's just stay over on this camera, and I'm going to show you some of the ways that we can do this. I'm going to start with, where is my easy one here? Here it is. Okay, so this one is one that I have started, and this one I did with a stitch in the ditch. Okay, so what we have to do now is get it over to the other side and then stitch it in position. So what I did is I actually sewed it on from this side. I'm going to bring it around, and then I want to tack it in place here and stitch it from the front so that when I'm stitching, you can't really see it. Starts to give it a little bit, I don't know, more of a hand sewn look from this side because you can't see any stitching. So normally when I sew my binding down by machine, I sew it to the back, bring it around to the front. This one, we're going to bring it around to the back and sew from the front. All right. The thing about this one is that it doesn't always work the way I want it to. So this is the way that I did the 2.5 one. And using 2.5, you can see how much I've caught here versus how much here. So this is something, but it's all even on this side. So it's something that just kind of varies on how far you've pulled it over. And when you're working on it from the front, you don't really have a lot of control on the back. So that's one thing I don't particularly love about this, this technique. But I'm going to show you a couple of ways of dealing with it. So first, we're just going to clip it. Okay, so I'm going to use a couple of little wonder clips. This is the, I think the way that most people start trying to do this. And then we'll show you a few more techniques to make it a little easier. And I think this is how it was done for a long time, because new techniques come up all the time, which I think is kind of fascinating about this process. Okay, so now I'm going to switch it back to a straight, and I'm going to switch it up to a 3.0 stitch. I have found that I want a bigger stitch when I'm doing my top stitching because we're sewing through a lot of layers. It's not going to move as fast. And if I do like a 2.5 or a 2.0, which is usually what I sew my bindings together with, it doesn't move at all. And then it's super frustrating. So, and also I use the dual feed to do this most of the time. So it will help move it along. Okay, so I've got my stitch in the ditch foot down. I'm going to put my foot down, and then my needle is going to come down right next to the binding. All right, so it's coming in just at this edge, basically where the laser is where my stitches are going to be. All right, we're just going to stitch along here until I get to here, and I have to take my clip out. So this is one of those places where when you take the clips out, you may have held this really tight, but when you take the clip out, it loosens it up and it kind of makes things grow a little bit. So it doesn't always stay exactly where you want it to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and clip my thread. I want to see what that looks like. Okay, so from this side, you can see the red stitching in here, just right along that edge. So the foot worked perfectly in keeping it right along the edge. All right, so that's where my stitches hit here. And then on the back, I ended up falling off here where I took out that last wonder clip because it had gotten loose. So it had moved as I went, which is generally the problem I have with this technique. So it works, but there's that frustration. So we have a couple of different things that you can do. All right, and this requires some basting. And there's a couple of different ways that you can do it. All right, so we have 3 methods that we can use. Where's the open one? There it is. Okay, so I've got, this is what I've used. We're going to use this as well today. So I'm going to try it 3 different ways here. Okay, so this is the Acorn Precision Piecing Products. They're Seam-Align Gentle Hold Fabric Glue. Okay, so it's a big long name. I got this in a like a package that comes with their pressing products that help you press really flat seams, which is nice. But this is their glue. So I'm going to use this in part of it. We're going to use the Odif glue stick, which I love. And I learned to love when I was doing all the cuddle stuff because it works really well for that. But we're going to try it for binding. I haven't done this yet. And then the other one is the By Annie basting tape, which is the 1/8 inch basting tape. It's just this skinny little stuff that we can hold down. So one of the things that I know is that sewing through any of the Odif adhesives doesn't bother my needle. It doesn't get all gummed up. It's fine. One of the things I know about sewing through the By Annie tape is that it will totally gum up your needle. So that means that I can place this right along the edge, and I need to place this inside the edge so that when I'm stitching it down, I'm not actually hitting this. Okay, so I feel like this one is probably the least accurate because I can't put it right at the edge, whereas this I can as well. So let's give it a try. And I'm going to put a few little dots of glue here. There we go. So just some little dots. Lots of people will talk about using Elmer's glue for this sort of thing, or watered down Elmer's glue. And I'll say the thing I don't like about that idea is that it will be kind of hard. Like the school glue gets hard. Okay, so I'm going to hold this here. One of the things I learned yesterday when I was trying this is that if you iron this right away, it dries the glue too fast and it doesn't stick. So I have to stick the glue on. It doesn't want to stick for me as well today either. So I'm going to clip it and see if it'll hold better. Okay. All right, we're going to do a little strip of the By Annie tape. So this I'm going to stick up here just a little bit because I want it to be in an area that I'm not going to stitch. And I know I'm going to stitch just past this line because this is the seam line on the front. Okay, so this is hopefully where I'm going to be stitching. It's just along there. So if I stitch, or if I put my basting tape in just a little bit, it should work. Okay.
Does that basting tape wash out?
No, it does not.
Got it.
It does not ever wash out. So something to keep in mind. All right, and then the other one I'm going to do is the Odif glue stick, and I'm just going to stick that right along the edge of this fabric. Okay, so right along the serging, which works really well because it kind of caught the glue. You could probably see that. It caught it really nicely. All right, so now I'm going to get a couple other little clips. I'll clip this some more. They are all sinking to the bottom. Okay, there we go. Okay, so already I could see that this one holds it down the best, right? So is this one stuck yet? Yep, this one is stuck. Here's the Odif, here's the Biani tape, here's the acorn glue. Okay, I'll turn that so you can see my view on it. So here's the Odif, Biani, acorn.
We are still live.
Okay.
We're back. Hold on. I got to check some settings. That button did not go back the way I wanted it to. That was the wrong back button. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay, I think we're back.
Okay, good. This happened once before. I remember on Sew Together Tuesday once. We were like, oh no, we lost it. And then somebody was still in the room, so it stayed, which was great. Thanks for being here, Audrey. Okay, so now I've got my clips in. So
let's check. I've still got a "Where are you?" from Patty. So
oh no.
Is everybody got us again? Can I get a little thumbs up that we're back?
Can you see us? Can you hear us? Can you see if Audrey's in the private chat?
Okay. There
We're
we go.
good?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so now I've got it clipped the same way that I did it here, that I just clipped along the edge, but this one I didn't glue it down. I just tried to hold it over with the Wonder Clips, and it clearly did not work right. Okay, so we're gonna try it this way with the 3 different gluing techniques, for lack of a better word, and we'll see how this goes. So I'm gonna lift up my foot, get that under there. I'm going to have to take that clip out right away. And then I'm just going to line up this till it hits the binding. All right. Then I can put my foot down. And I'm just going to start stitching. And we're going to see what happens. Okay. And we're just going to stitch this whole way. So again, just running that little guide right down the edge of it works super duper well, and I don't have to really fight it at all. It just runs right down there. Okay, and they do make these. This looks a little extra fancy because it's for the walkie foot thing. But the other ones will just have this bar down the middle, and they totally work. If you have a Bernina, I know it's the 10 foot. So that one is my favorite. All right, so there we go. Looks great from this side. Even though it's red thread, you really can't, just kind of looks like a dark edge in there, which is nice. So it did run perfectly where it was supposed to be. And on the back, it worked really well, except for here, which I won't blame the glue for that because that was me not clipping it. I had to take the clip out super early, and the glue didn't stick there very well. So, but you can see this runs really nicely and was able to stay pretty darn even. So it gets a little bigger here, but not anything like when I did it this way with the larger one and just tried to clip it. Okay, I had a lot more variation with this. So this, I remember, was the 2.5, which sometimes people are like, use the 2.5 because then you have more wiggle room. But what I find is that you just end up having lots of little floppy bits back here. Okay, this one works much better, and we only have this little edge that's loose. Turn that so you can see. So we only have this little edge. All right. It's a pretty nice finish, I will say. All right. So that's how that one works. Now, what I want to do, let me see if I have, let's do it on here. So this is just going to be another example I'm going to show you. So this is the way that I normally do mine. So I used to always do it that way, stitch in the ditch. And then I would get frustrated because I couldn't get it to stay in the right place. With the glue, it works pretty well. But having to do that all the way around a large quilt is kind of a pain. So it's not really my favorite. So I like to do something else. And I like to fold this over and stitch it in position this way. So this would be the front of my quilt, okay? And I'm still gonna use my stitch in the ditch foot, and I'm gonna go ahead and move my needle over as far as I want it to be. Let's see, I'm gonna put my needle down, see if I like that. I'm gonna do one more. So now it's at 2 1/4 is where I put my, 2.25 is where I put my needle. I moved it over. All right, I'm gonna grab my stiletto and we're gonna stitch this down. So what I do is I just use my stiletto here to kind of hold it in position as I sew. And that way I can kind of grab it and I can keep it a little bit tighter. And that's really why I do the 2 1/8 is because I can really kind of pull it over. If I'm using thick batting though, it doesn't work as well, I will say. When we get to these points, these are going to be thicker because we have a seam here that comes around here. So these are thicker. So make sure you pull it nice and tight to get it to be in the right place. All right. All right, I'm going to go ahead and take that out because I want to show you a couple other techniques as well. Okay, so now I've got a little lip, but it's on the front of the quilt. So it works the same way. You end up with the same look, except that this one I'm not running exactly along the edge, but if I were using a cream thread, you'd never see that there. But on the top, I can make sure that that little lip here is the same size all the way around. So let me show you the other sample that I did that's like that. That would be this one. Okay, so this one, I just stitched it all around the top. And it's generally what I do for most of my quilting. Before,
Can we see what the back side of that looked like? Sorry.
That's okay.
The one you just showed.
Yeah, so you can see there was a couple times I got a little blips up here that I stitched on the binding. Sometimes I stitch on the back.
Yeah, and because it's matching thread,
it doesn't really show.
Irrelevant. It's the back side. So
it's the back side, and honestly, if it's quilt that's going to be used a lot, I don't really care. If this were a show coaster, it would make a big difference. But it's really just a little sample. Now we have more coasters.
Oh man.
Okay.
New category. Houston, here we come.
That's
show
right.
Coasters.
One of the things that I skipped past, and I want to show you because we're going to have to come up to that at some point here with doing corners. So I didn't show you how to sew on the mitered corner. Okay, so I'm going to do that right here. This is sewn onto the front. Okay. So again, I'm going to swap my feet out. So I'm going to put this down. There we go. All right, so I'm going to sew on. So this is just the 1/4 inch that we're going to sew on the binding. So we're just kind of going back a step. Sorry, guys. Okay, I'm going to turn my light off because I find in certain places that my light kind of gets distracting and I don't particularly love it. I'm going to use this ruler and I'm going to mark on here.
The laser, you mean?
Yeah, sorry, what did I say?
The light. I was just making sure that we were talking about the same light. Got it. So yeah, you turn the laser off. Check.
Okay, so now I've got my ruler. Here's my 1/4 inch mark, and I'm just going to try to make a little mark right here. If I can do it. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to use that to kind of eyeball where I need to stop because I need to stop a 1/4 inch before. Okay, and then I'm going to turn. So I just turn it at a 45, is that what that is? 45 degrees? And then sew right off that corner. So that's what I've done. So I've stitched down, stitched off. All right. Oh, my needle is moved over. I was like, why was that not actually a 1/4 of an inch? This right here.
Oh,
You
yeah.
see?
Got it. Yeah, yeah.
Let's do it again.
Why wasn't that matching?
Why was my surge showing? It shouldn't be. Let's try it again. There we go. Much better. Now it covers the surgeon just barely. Okay. So then when I need to do this corner, so I stitched off the corner, then the important part is you're going to bring this tail this direction. So this is going to work for any sort of corner that you do. When you're doing a 90-degree corner like this, it's easy because it's just going to go straight across. It's 90 degrees down from here. This is a 45. When you're doing something like the collar on the elemental coat, it isn't a 45 or a 90-degree corner here. It kind of comes out like this. You're going to do it the same way in that you're going to take it down and make this next edge go straight across. So no matter what this is doing, if this were over here like this, we don't really care. We want it to go straight along this bottom edge. Does that make sense? Okay, so this edge here needs to be straight. So we're going to fold it across here. Then I like to use my stiletto, if I can find it, because we're doing that again. Okay, so I'm going to fold this down, and I just hold it here. Lots of people hold it with your finger, but then if you hold it with your finger, you get here and you don't actually have it tight when you take your finger out. So I like to put it up, hold it down with my stiletto, bring it back, and then I can get it really nice and tight right there. Okay, you want it so that this fold is just up to that raw edge.
But not past it.
But not past it.
Because if you let it hang out over the edge, you're in trouble.
Right, exactly. So let me see if I can do this. You guys can see what I'm doing. So I am just going to pin this in position so that it stays where I want it to be. I'm not sewing here. I'm going to sew along this edge, but this is going to create that nice sharp corner for me. So I'll come back in here, put that underneath my foot, and again, sew with an accurate 1/4 inch right along this edge. All right. So we'll take that out. Now I can take my pin out, and at this point, we have the nice miter. Okay, so that turned out really nicely. Then that will fold back and fold back. When we do it from this side, one of the things that you can remember is to fold it so that your bulk is in opposite directions. So on this way, because the way we fold it, our bulk is right here. You can see there's like a little lip. There's extra bulk in here. So when I fold it to sew it the other direction, I actually want to sew it this way.
Oh, you could pick which fabric you laid down first.
Yes.
Which side of the corner you laid down first, and in this case, you want to make it the opposite of what happened on the back side.
Exactly.
Got
exactly. It. So that way, and I can use my stiletto to get this a little bit more accurate.
Re-explain it.
Yep. So it's coming together in a nice little miter right here as well. Okay. So that's how we want to do that. And then I will go ahead and I will clip this. And what I have found is that if I fold these corners first and I clip them and let them just live like that, when I get around to sewing them, they're much more likely to stay exactly where I want them to because I kind of pressed them into place for, you know, if it's a big quilt, it's been for days that they've stayed like this before I could get to them, and then they actually stay much more accurate. So we have that way of doing it. Okay, now let me show. So we did it, the top stitching, yes. Okay, so then we're going to show some other ways of doing it.
I will say, while we're talking about mitered corners, can you talk briefly about rounded corners?
Oh yeah, let's talk about it. Let me show, I'm actually going to show you how you can do the stitching here really quick, because I think that is a part that sometimes can be a little, it can be a little futzy, and it doesn't always work beautifully. So I will say that I've been known to not get them perfect. If you look at all of my corners, you'll notice that. Okay, so again, I'm going to stick this under. So I'm going to stitch this like I did before, and I'm going to move it back again to 2 1/4. Okay, lining my binding up with the edge of that guide. So now when I get here, I'm going to stitch down here. Yep. And I have to immediately take my clip out. So now I'm going to use my stiletto to hold it where I want it to be. Okay, and that's one of the things that I really do like about the stiletto is that it lets me get much closer to things than I could otherwise. So I don't have any way of holding that unless I use that stiletto. So one of the things about doing this, where I did like kind of the flip-flop of the thickness, where you put thick on one side and thick on the other, is that this corner is much easier to come over. So you'll notice sometimes if you're doing this and you haven't, this corner gets very, very thick. I'll have to see if I can find one that I didn't care about it and see, because you'll notice that all of your, you're folded up in the middle there is on one side. So it's, you know, numerous times thicker than the other side. So that works out pretty well. So it's not perfectly on that corner on the miter, but really, who cares? It's pretty good. All right, so that's how you would do that. Just pivot around the corner.
Are we in done is better than perfect planned?
I am always in done is better than perfect planned. That's where I live. Okay, so we talked about you can stitch it from the top. You can stitch it from the back. Well, both of those were stitched from the front. We stitched it in the ditch, and then we did it so that the flange came over, or the thing came over the front. The binding came over the front. So let me show you again. I'll reiterate for myself as well. Okay, so this one here, sewed it to the front, stitched in the ditch, got a little bit here. This one, I pretended this was the front. I sewed it to the back, brought it around to the front and stitched it. And there you can see I end up a little bit on here. Okay, so that's just that you kind of have to decide which side you want to be perfect. And I always want it to be the front side. And I like this look better than I like too much on the back, and I don't like glue basting. So that's why I choose to do it this way. If you don't mind the glue basting or caring a lot if it's pulled over tight on the back, you can do it that way too. Okay, so both of those are pretty simple ways of doing it on the machine and pretty much the standard way of doing it. Let me show you the corners. So what we're talking about, rounded corners?
Yes.
Okay, so now we showed you the mitered corner, so I'm going to show you the rounded corner. And basically this was a square that I just curved off both corners. And when I do that, let's see if I have another one. Nope. Okay, so what I use are these rulers, which are from Creative Grids, and they're the Creative Grids non-stick rotary cutting circles. And it has been well beaten up packaging. It is not pretty anymore, but these things have lasted me forever. I've probably had them for 10 or 12 years. They are great. So they come in sizes 2.5, 3.5, 4.5, 5.5, and 6.5. Could
you scoot the package down a little bit so we can see it beat up or not, so we know what we're looking for in the shop?
It's this beautiful package. It has been well loved, to say the least. So this is the package you're looking for, and it comes with all of these sizes in there, which is super duper helpful because now you can kind of have any size corner that you want to. So I actually have something I'm going to grab. Sorry, I should have done this earlier. I was gonna, and then I forgot. So I'm going to grab this real quick. It's just a little square I have that's quilted up already. So what I would do is if I had my quilted piece, I didn't have any more that didn't have binding on them. So if I have my quilted piece, this is my quilt. And a lot of people think that rounded corners are easier. I don't necessarily think they are, and I'll talk about it in just a second. But what we want to do is figure out how big this corner is going to be. The smaller your circle that you use, the smaller this little corner is going to be. All right, so you can use this one versus this one here, which is going to give you a much bigger rounded corner. All right, so it kind of depends on what you want on yours. I think I used, did I use this one? Oh, I might have used the big, huge one on this one. Let me see. Yeah, looks like it. So this is the size that I used, which is the 6.5. Double check. Yep. This is the 6.5 size that I used to get this curve. So it's a pretty big, gentle curve there. Okay. Let's see if I can get it so you guys can see it a little bit better. There we go. So that's how that is.
And still with the fabric binding, it definitely pulled up. Even though it was a nice big gentle curve, it's still,
right. It's still pulled up a little bit.
It didn't stretch enough in the right ways for that to lay down.
Exactly. So that's the corner as it would have been, and then that's how I cut it off. Okay. The other one I want to show you is on the elemental coat. We do it, and on this one, we use a smaller one. I think we might use the next size up. Yeah. So on this one, this is the rounded corner on the coat, and I used a 3.5 to get this little corner on here. Okay, so this is another place that you can get rounded corners, is on the quilt coat.
If you told me that was easier than the miters, I'd believe you.
Well, the thing that it's easier in some ways, and it's not as easy in others. So, what did I do with? Oh, there it is. Okay. You know what? I'm like, I want to show you how this works. So we're just going to cut a corner, okay? We already did this. You know how this worked. So I'm going to cut this off. This reminds me a little bit when I had to tear open the ottoman to get stuffing out of it on one of the shows before. Do you remember that?
Yes. Yes. That was the robbing Peter to pay Paul episode.
People were like, you're doing what? So I'm just going to cut that thing off that I just did. Totally fine. I use my little pen here. So you can absolutely use these circles and use your rotary cutter with them. I do it with the big ones. With the small ones, I tend to like to cut them with scissors better. Okay, so we've got our rounded corner, and I've got my bias binding. All right, let me switch my foot out again. I told you I was going to switch it like 1,000 times, which makes me really glad that switching the foot on this one is super easy. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put this on here. So this is a 1/4 inch seam allowance that we're going to do here. So I need to make sure I move my needle again. My foot down, get my needle back in the right position for the right seam allowance. Now, as I come to this corner, you're going to see I have to get this to go around the corner here, right? So we're coming up on it pretty close. I can't see under there very well, so I want to pin it. So I will stick some pins in here like this. Oops, sorry. So now I have a little bit easier time sewing around this curve, okay? One of the things that people like to do, what I have found is that people will do, is that they'll pull this as they're stitching, and you can kind of get this to go. But what you're doing is you're actually stretching the bias binding. So what happens when you do that is that you get a curl. And I will show you, again, on this coat, one of these sides is fairly buckled because I did that. So can you see how this kind of curls up here? If I press that flat, it's going to totally curl up.
Yeah, it makes a little cup.
Yes. So I've learned this lesson the hard way.
Which kind of seems like the problem you get with the fabric binding.
Yes.
So you basically negated,
because you've negated the stretch. You've pulled all the stretch out of it. So it isn't stretchy anymore. It's exactly the problem. Yeah, good point. So this is what will happen, and you can kind of see that. I wish you could see it a little better, but it really does kind of bowl up right there. And that's because I pulled it. Okay. So don't pull it. And that's really the biggest problem. And I think it's really common to do because it would be really easy to just pull this and let it feed through, but it will give me it will take all of the stretch right out of it. So instead I'm just gonna lay this down, and then I'm gonna stick a pin in. I'm just gonna kind of bring it around that corner rather than stretching it around the corner. And that's really the key, is to not stretch it around the corner. Okay, so now I'll sew this. I'll say one of the other things about sewing the corners curved like this that I struggle with, and we'll see, is actually getting an accurate 1/4 inch. So it often ends up, and I might have gotten a little pucker in there. So these are the things that I struggle with this technique. You may love it. So give it a shot. I really would encourage you to just try all the things. You'll find out what you like and what you don't like. Okay, so let's see. Not too big, not too much of a pucker right there, just a tiny little blip. Okay, but my seam allowance isn't perfect. I can see my quilt is hanging out here. I don't know which of these is actually the 1/4 inch. So the binding is actually sewn at a 1/4 of an inch, and the quilt is a little bit bigger than that. So I'm going to want to cut this off, because otherwise the binding won't come around that. Okay.
Oh, that's a good question. When you're doing the miters, do you ever cut that corner out of there?
No, I don't, unless it's too thick and I have done it the wrong way, where I've done 2 layers, and then I will try to trim it. Yeah.
Got it.
But normally I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, because normally I try to like sandwich them or nest them, I guess is really what you're doing. You're nesting those seams. So yes, you can do it. I have done it many times because I have messed up. I just don't. I don't necessarily recommend it that way. Okay, so now we're going to kind of just massage this around the edge. Clip it. And then we would go ahead and top stitch that however we want to. Okay, so by stitching it in the ditch, you could hand stitch this in position, which is probably my preferred method for corners, just because, or for rounded corners, because they're, I don't know, a little fidgety. So, and I also really love a hand bound quilt. So I'll show you that in a second. So that's how we would do a rounded corner. Okay. It's not necessarily any easier than doing a mitered corner, just because I feel like you have to be fidgetier with it. You know what I mean? So, not bad, but not my jam. Okay. All right. So let's talk about other binding finishes. You guys have been here for a while. I don't even know what time it is. Okay.
Yeah, we're almost at 2 hours.
Hi, guys.
An hour and 40.
All right.
You guys are hanging in strong.
I appreciate it. We'll chop it up and make it into shorter videos, and it'll work great too. So this is a flange binding, which I really, really like. So it's actually a faux flange. So a flange normally would be 2 layers of fabric. You would sew down one binding, or one layer that would be this little bit, and then you would sew down a binding. The way this works is you actually sew 2 pieces of fabric together. One is slightly larger than the other. What I did is I cut them, I think, at 1 1/2 and 1 3/4, and I sewed them together, and I folded this in half and cut it at 1 1/8, because I knew that's how big I wanted. If I divide my 2 1/4, the half of it would be 1 1/8. So I cut it that wide. So I didn't really worry so much about the cutting in the first place to make sure it was super accurate. I just cut it to be right afterward, because I wanted to get this fold as even as possible. So when this fold comes over, we want this little edging here to be accurate. So we do it the same way. You fold it down, bring it around, and then when you stitch it, you're stitching it right here in that little seam right here.
I really like this look. It's like a little, pinstripe.
I think it's very cute. I think it's just perfect for baby blankets. I think it's absolutely adorable. And really is just a little bit of extra work in that you're creating the binding with the 2 pieces. One thing to note is that your seam allowance for this seam of these 2 fabrics coming together is going to get pressed toward the, in this case, the blue fabric.
Oh, so you don't iron
press
that
it
seam open.
Right, because it's a 1/4 inch seam. So your seam should take up this whole bulk of the binding here, which will give it a little bit more body too. And I kind of like fluffy bindings when they're finished, which you don't get when you serge it. So, 6 of one, half dozen of another. So this is the flange, super easy way of doing it. I did a couple other techniques. So this one is the blanket stitch. And I will say I really didn't love this one. I want to because I love a good blanket stitch, but I feel like they're so much better when you hand stitch them. This one, my fabric wanted to move on me. I got stitches in the wrong place because it does a little back and forth thing. And so when it would move the fabric backward, it would shift it to where, you know, the feed dogs were messing with me in that regard because they weren't shifting perfectly straight. It wasn't shifting perfectly straight
And
back.
what was my question when we talked about this last night? Was like, well, you wouldn't see it so much if you just used a matching thread, right? Like this is only a big deal because you used the bright red.
Right.
But then, if you're gonna do a blanket stitch, you kind of want to see it.
Yeah, exactly. I want to be able to see it. I want to show that off because this took me, I don't know, 4 or 5 times as long to do as any of the other stitches because you're doing a stitch and 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 a stitch. Like you end up doing this like back and forth thing a bunch, and it's really, yeah, it's a lot. And it definitely was a lot of this and trying to control it. So not my favorite. I've done lots of techniques on sewing with Cuddle and lots of tutorials on it, and sewing it with binding. It's great, especially if you've backed your quilt with Cuddle. It's fabulous, and I absolutely love a Cuddle backed quilt. So this one is done with 1 3/4 inch seam or 1 3/4 inch binding. Sew it to the back with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Bring it around, and this is just the raw edge. So I'm going to turn this around so you guys can see that really well. Okay, so this right here is just the raw edge, and people often want to disbelieve me that that's how you do it, but it's absolutely, this just gets brought down. And then I did a serpentine stitch with this one. So this is a serpentine rather than a straight stitch or a blanket stitch.
So why does that work with Cuddle with the raw edge? It's because it's a knit.
It's because it's a knit fabric. Exactly. It won't unravel and it won't fray at all. So you're good to go. I do make it so that the nap comes toward the front. So if you're a Cuddle sewer, all of that will make a lot of sense. But it does make for a very nice binding. And honestly, if you're making for a child, this will be your strongest binding that will last you decades. So that child can drag that blanket around all over the place, and this binding is not going to wear out like a cotton binding would. Okay. All right. So the last technique that I want to show you, well, second to last actually, is a self-binding. Somebody had asked me about doing this. And so I did a bit of research. Like I showed you at the beginning, that first, or the quilt that I made for Audrey, I did it with a self-binding, and I didn't love it. In retrospect, I don't like it, but it was what I knew how to do at that point. But the way that you do this is that you're going to trim. So this is my quilt. This is my excess batting. And I'm going to cut that off. The thing is, you have to be really careful not to clip your backing fabric. So you'll go ahead and trim your whole quilt this way. And trim off all of the excess batting. All right. There was one way I showed, or I saw that she folded this under. Like this. Okay, you see that? So I fold the point and then fold this under and fold this under. Fold this under and fold it under again.
It's like origami.
And then you end up having your mitered corner, which looks like this. So if I wanted to take the time and hand stitch this, this would be a beautiful little corner. Totally fine. But if I'm doing this as a time-saving method, I don't think it really helped save me time. So the other way that you can do it is the way that I did it before, where you're just going to fold it over. You're going to stitch that down. You'll fold this over and stitch that down.
Oh, so basically it's not mitered anymore.
It's not mitered. It's just doubled up. Okay, so if you want to do a mitered, you can do it that way. If you don't mind, you can do it this way. And that is, again, how I finished this one. Okay, so totally fine way of doing it. What I have found is that, and I remember when I did this one, and same with that, is that it's really easy to clip the backing as you're trimming out your batting. So then you've got a hole in your backing, where I think it's just as easy to square it all up and add a binding. So that's my personal opinion, but the self-binding totally works. And, you know, she used this quilt quite a bit when she was a baby and still wore fine. So no big deal on that one. Okay, I think that's, oh, no, one more. one more little thing I wanted to show you, and then I'll let you go. So this is to hand stitch the finish. So this is honestly my favorite way of doing quilts. This is how the Lucid quilt was finished. So here's the corner on that. So this is the back side of it. I sewed it to the front. This was an accident. You remember how I told you I like to get the seams right in the corner? That one.
Oh, where the binding fabric meets?
Yeah, where I have my binding. There's a seam right there, and it nailed it right in the corner. Boom. Did not try.
Nor would you want to try. Nobody try.
Nobody wants to try. It's not really fun because it gets too thick right there. But that's how that looks. So I sewed it to the front, brought it around to the back, and hand stitched this all down. This is just done with a ladder stitch. I left a couple little blips here to show you. We'll see if I can do it without getting my hands in the way too much. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little stitch here. And then I take a little stitch here. And by a little stitch, I mean like less than 1/8 of an inch. Okay, and the reason I do this is because I feel like this holds it better than doing like a longer stitch. And
like
I love the way that this finishes. Yeah, like a whip stitch sometimes people will do, and I just think it doesn't hold quite as nicely. All right, so once I've got a few of these little rungs in there, okay, can you see those?
Yes.
Okay, so once I've got some of those little rungs in there, I'm just going to pull it nice and tight. All right, when I get up here to this corner, I'm going to feel, okay, so my bulk is over there. It means I can really manipulate this really easily because I've got it all in my hands. So then I'm just going to fold that and stitch around that corner. And I will usually stitch up this just a little bit and then fold it back. Okay, and then keep stitching and go right along. And then you end up with a binding that is actually about 1/4 of an inch on either side. Okay, so this is kind of like the nicest finish that you can get.
That's your show quilt finish.
That's my show quilt finish.
Copy.
Although I did find out that if you're going to submit to a quilt show, you're also supposed to hand stitch these down. Your little miters, which I didn't know until recently.
Well, isn't that fussy?
Yeah. Okay, so here is, I told you I was going to see if I could find one. So here is one where I nested them, and here is where I didn't. Can you see the difference in that thickness?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
One side is on the bottom version.
Yeah.
The bottom layer, like that one is super thick on the right hand side and super thin on the left hand side of the miter.
Yeah, this one is.
And then the other one, the top one, it's even.
Yeah. So there you go. Okay.
Object lesson.
Object lesson. So when you nest them, they end up being really, really nice. All right. So I think that's it. All right. We can come around to the front. We can see my pile of chaos right here.
No, you cannot.
You can't.
There it is.
There's the pile of chaos. Yeah, there we go. So all the things that we talked about. Super good. Thanks for doing that, because I really wanted to kind of just go through the whole thing, because I feel like a lot of times when we are new to some of these techniques, they just tell us like, go do it. And then you're like, where do I start? So now you have a place to start, and hopefully some of these techniques kind of fit with what you might want to try. And I would suggest just making some little sandwiches like I did and trying out different things and seeing if that's the way you like doing it, and kind of nailing down the process on a small project. And then when you do the big quilt, you can finish it up with a binding that is really just stellar. I used some of the techniques that are in this book. Let me show you. So this book is called The Ultimate Binding and Finishing Guide, and it's from Dion Stott. And she is a super nice lady. I think she has a blog. I know she does Instagram and all that sort of stuff. But the book is all about different ways of binding and finishing your quilt. So she actually talks about like the flange, but she talks about adding circles, rickrack, doing the prairie points, all sorts of things in here. So more than 16 different techniques.
My computer just made the thumbs up thing with you.
Did it? Oh, great.
Yeah, it was super cute.
Thumbs up about this book. I really do like it. It's really, it's well done. I will say that you can watch my tutorial on how to do cuddle binding, because it's a little different than hers.
And where is that? Over on Shannon Fabrics?
It's on the
website?
Shannon Fabrics YouTube page.
Yeah, there
yes,
you go.
You can find that.
So together Tuesday.
Yep, for Sew Together Tuesday, exactly. So, okay, so thank you so much for joining me. We want to talk really quickly about where I'm going. So we have been off the road and we will be until the end of the month. But the end of this month, I start hitting the road and I have a few places this fall. So not like I did this the spring where we had a ton of different things going on. We have a few different things, but this is it for the fall. So we're not adding anything else until next year. But where are we going? So I'm going to was going to banner up on the first one. I think it's September. Oh no, August. Sorry, August 25th and 26th. I'm doing the Quilt Coat class at Bittersweet Quilt in Pinconning, Michigan, and I taught there years and years ago. And I'm really excited to go back and teach with them again. So I have 2 days. I know that the first day sold out really quickly. I think the second day is probably mostly full, but if you are in the area, there are some spaces, I believe. If you cannot get a space there, the next 2 days later, August 28th, is that the right date? 28th, I will be at,
Wow.
yay, I'll be at, so Let's Be Quilty. We got to figure out how to turn that off. It's hilarious. So Let's Be Quilty, and that is in Pentwater, Michigan. So on the other side of the state is where I will go and teach the Quilt Coat class there. Okay. And then I don't know if I have, let's see what else we have. September 13th, I'm teaching at From Past to Present in St. Clairsville, Ohio. And that is on the very east side of Ohio. So if you're in the Virginia area, Pennsylvania, Pittsburgh area, totally within driving range. So you can come see me there. That'll be really fun. And then I'm going to Fargo, North Dakota. We're teaching 2 days of Quilt Coat classes at Raybon up there in Fargo. So that's the 19th and the 20th. And both of those, I think they're separate days. And now that I say it, I'm not really sure if they're 2 days of classes or a 2-day workshop. So you'll have to check that out because some stores do that where they give us 2 days and then we get to finish the whole thing, which is awesome.
You actually get to hang out with Teresa and bind the quilt.
And then bind the quilt. So we get to do it in person, which
How
is super
on topic.
fun. Exactly. All right. And we've got the 23rd, we'll be doing the Quilt Coat class at Sew On and Sew North, which is north of that by a few hours in Langdon, North Dakota. So that one is up kind of near the Canadian border, and I'm excited to get back there too. I taught there with Hawk a few years ago. So we're looking forward to getting back there and seeing Peggy and yeah, making a lot of quilt coats. That'll be really fun. All right. And then we've got October 9th and 10th. I'll be teaching at the Quilt Festival in Houston, Texas. I know that one of the Quilt Coat classes and the Puppy Dog Pete are sold out, but I will be teaching another one that's about integrating patchwork into your clothing. So more than just quilt coats, but how to use it in different ways and upcycling textiles to kind of add to your wardrobe. All right. And then I think the next one is the 23rd and to 25th. Yes, the 23rd to 25th. I'm teaching the Quilt Coat class at the Quilted Cow in Colorado Springs. Think through it for a second. We're going to be doing that one as a big workshop. We're going to work through everything together. So that one is one that we can kind of like, put the patchwork together a little bit and actually work through it more. So I'm looking forward to that. And I'm doing a trunk show there on the 23rd. So that should be pretty fun. And then the 12th, I'll be in Huntington Beach speaking at the Orange County Quilt Guild and doing a workshop with them that same day. So we'll do a workshop. Oh, and actually they sold out, so they added a second day. So we'll have one on the 13th as well. So there might be room in the second one. I know that the 12th is sold out. So 13th, if you want one. And is that it?
No, we're going to go all the way into next year.
Then we'll go all the way into next year. So next year we've got one of them planned. We have another one that we're trying to work out the details for in the Northwest. But we do have one. We have a Midwest Makers Retreat that is scheduled for next May 21st to 24th. And we're going to be holding that in Decorah, Iowa, near one of my favorite shops, Red Roxy Quilt Co. And we have taught there numerous times. I've been to that shop so many times. I really like them. They have a great selection of cuddle and a ton of other fabrics. They sell Bernina machines, and they have a retreat center that is just down the road a bit. And so we'll be hanging out there. We are probably about half full.
We're maybe a little more than half full.
Yeah.
And if you guys want to sell that out for us, we have the next week on reserve too.
Yes.
So
yes.
help us out.
Yeah, exactly. So we can do 2 weeks there if we want to. And if we get enough people who are interested, we totally will. This year it worked out so great. And we had such a fun time sewing together and also learning together, because we had guest educators, and all the food is cooked for you, and it's just a come and make stuff with us and learn with us kind of time. So it's really super fun.
Carolyn, thanks for the heads up. Orange County's completely sold out.
It's completely. Okay, there you go.
So there you go. Can we do a couple of quick
it's
questions?
in Anaheim. Is that what she said? Not Huntington Beach?
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's correct.
Somewhere in Southern California. Just kidding. I know the difference. Totally know the difference. All right. Is that
Jesse asks, are you planning to post the different widths for the different types of binding?
Yes, I will post on my blog. I will type this all up and basically include all of the stuff over on my blog.
Show notes.
Yeah. To try to give you all of the information in a written form that you can actually maybe download and be able to look at later. So I do plan on doing that. Give me a few days. If you are not a part of the Facebook Make with Teresa group, get on that, or you can sign up for my newsletter at crinkledreams.com. Either one of those, I will announce when that is available on the blog for you to be able to go and look back and find. And then we might be able to divvy up some of this into shorter little blips that you can learn how to do each one over and over again. So there you go. All right. So I think that's it, except for prices.
Yeah, I think
so. That was a lot, you guys. Thanks. Okay, so we should have 2 winners. You're going to win a copy of the Lucid Quilt, so you can make your own version of this.
The PDF copy.
The PDF copy.
All they need to do is email me at hawk@crinkledreams.com.
Yep.
HAWKE@crinkledreams.com.
Yep.
And I will send you a PDF copy.
So there you go. You'll get your own copy to make your own Lucid pattern. We are doing a sew along as well. So if you have bought the pattern, you're interested in the pattern, you can also sign up for the sew along that'll be happening, that will give you all of the access to the tutorial videos that'll be coming with that. And that one is kicking off next Sunday. Then we're going to kick it off with a little live and kind of a Q&A, and basically you get to know the pattern and what fabrics to pick and that sort of thing. And then you'll get weekly videos after that for a while, and I will be available to answer any questions. So should be kind of fun, and we might have a little work along time along there. So we'll see. But you can sign up, you can get both of those. They're 2 separate products on the crinkledreams.com website. So both of those are available. We'll be kicking that off soon. I'm also doing Sew Together Live for Shannon Fabrics next Tuesday, so you can catch me there, and that'll be really fun. I'm doing a little pencil project.
Wait, what?
I know, it'll be really fun.
You get to revisit your own show?
I do. It's really exciting. So come on back and watch me there too. It'll be really fun. Is that it? I think it might be. Classes, lives. I think we caught it all. All right. We got the winners. We announced them.
We did.
Who was the winner? I missed it.
It scrolled across the bottom.
I need to say their names.
There we go. Patty Bertino and Kathleen Lemansky.
Nice. Thank you.
Congratulations.
Yes. I think we met Patty somewhere. You can tell me if I'm remembering that wrong. I feel like we did. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for being here every time. I really appreciate it so much. We will be back next month, and we're going to talk sewing curves next month. So not just curved rounded corners, but we're going to talk about actually sewing curves together, and I'll have a new pattern for you. So I'm looking forward to that. Until then, happy sewing.